Hello everyone and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. OSU's test plots have been harvested and the results are in. Joining us now is Jeff Edwards, our small grains extension specialist. And Jeff, you really had much better conditions this year than last year.
Yeah, it was a much better year than last year. At least we had something to harvest. As a matter of fact, we were able to harvest all of our variety test locations this year, which is something that doesn't always happen. So a really good year for wheat production in Oklahoma. Some really good yields at our sites. We had variety trial locations that were averaging in the 50s and 60s, even the 70s, which is great.
Let's talk about some of the varieties then that did really well and kind of hit those 70s that you mentioned.
Well, we had a few varieties that did really well. One that comes to mind is a Westbred variety, WB Cedar, that did really well. It had a clean flag leaf and performed well in many of our tests around state. We have a few OSU varieties that have done very well. Of course, the two newest, Gallagher and Ibis, weathered all of the disease pressure that we had around the state very well, and both performed as expected, did very well. One of the varieties from OSU that's been out a couple of years, Ruby Lee, did very well at many locations around the state. But it does kind of point out one area where farmers need to pay attention, and that is with stripe rust susceptibility. Ruby Lee is a variety that's somewhat susceptible to stripe rust, and at locations where we did not have stripe rust pressure, it did outstanding. And at locations where we treated with a fungicide, did outstanding. But at a few locations where there was heavy stripe rust pressure and we did not treat with the fungicide, it was more middle of the pack. So it's a real key component for growers to know their variety and its susceptibility to diseases.
And if you are going to plant that variety, then be prepared for the management techniques that have to take place?
That's correct. We have some varieties, and Ruby Lee would fall in that category, that have some susceptibility, but they aren't devastated by the disease. Now, we had a few varieties this year, Pete, Armor, and Everest, that were absolutely devastated by stripe rust at a few locations. One location that comes to mind is Marshall, Oklahoma. Top yielding variety there made 65 bushels per acre. But then there was another one, Armor, that made 14 bushels per acre. And there's no doubt in my mind that if it had not been for stripe rust, that Armor would have made in the mid-50s to 60 bushels per acre, easily 40 bushels per acre taken off of the yield by stripe rust at that location. So there are a few of those varieties. If you're not prepared to spray a fungicide, if we're having a stripe rust year, then you don't need to plant those.
Now, a lot of talk, of course, about Gallagher and Ibis, sort of their first year out of the gate, the Sons of Duster. Overall, you mentioned they did pretty well?
They've done very well. Gallagher topped our forage trial here at Stillwater, so it's a great forage producer. It's done very well around the state. You know, whenever you have a new race of stripe rust come in like we did this year, you kind of have your fingers crossed hoping everything holds, and both of those held as far as their disease resistance. Ibis has done well around the state as well. They've been at the top of many of our trials, and they are living up to looking like they're going to be as good of a variety as Duster, if not better.
Okay, as we all know, harvest this year started several weeks early, and then as we got into it, there were some delays. How did that impact the yields and what you learned?
Well, we have a couple of situations. Because of the delayed harvest in some locations and the amount of wind and lodging that we had, we did have some sprouting issues, and there were some loads of wheat taken to the elevator, and people were paid feed wheat prices for it, which is pretty tough to handle. Given what the price could have been. So there are some differences in variety and how susceptible they are to sprouting in the head. What we're doing right now is running a test on some of our samples from some of our locations to determine how susceptible some of our newer varieties are to sprouting in the head, and we'll have that information out later in the summer. The other thing that we've dealt with are some situations where we have low test weight wheat, and that was mainly due to the drought and heat. The plants had several grain sites they were trying to fill, and whenever we got into the drought and heat during mid-grain fill, they simply shut down, and we have shriveled kernels and low test weight.
Okay, so you're going to take a look at some of this research moving forward in this sort of summertime months as you kind of regroup.
Right. We should have the information out on sprouting tolerance sometime in July. All of the yield information is available right now.
Okay, Jeff Edwards, our small grains extension specialist, and for more on those yield results and test variety information, you can go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.